Assalamu alaikum friends. I hope you guys are doing very well. Today we are going to discuss an interesting topic of pharmacology, that is the dose response curve. So before diving deeper into the topic, I think I should build up some foundations of you. At first we should know what is dose. Actually dose is the amount of drug that is administered in a single time. So what I mean that if I suggest you to take paracetamol for 500 milligram, then this 500 milligram is called a dose when you take it for a single time. Now often we find confusing between two commonly used terms, dose and dosage. Dosage. So what is dosage? Dosage is actually the amount of a drug, the frequency, amount and number or time duration of taking the drug. So when I say that you should take paracetamol for 500 milligram 2 times a day for 7 days, then this entire formulation will be included under the term dosage. So I hope you guys now can clearly differentiate between dose and dosage. Another is the response. Actually what response does mean? Response actually means the effect of the drug you have taken. It can be a good effect or it can be a bad effect. So for now we should consider that response is actually the effect of the drug you have just taken. And a curve, what actually the curve is, you know better than me. A curve is just a graphical representation of a function. So now I think I should go from very basic. We have done or we have plotted too many graphs in our high school classes. Suppose the most common one, y equal to mx plus c. So when we plot this graph, you know this will be a plane or this will be a linear equation. This will be the graph, or somehow you can say that I have done a mistake. This should be like this. This one is the c. So whatever it is, when we plot a graph, we must consider two variables. One is the independent variable, that is the x, and another is the dependent variable. You know that we plot the independent variable in x-axis and the dependent variable in y-axis. This is very much basic. So in our dose response curve, the dose is independent. The dose is independent and the response is dependent on the dose. So basically we can change the dose. According to our wish, and the response will be changed according to the dose. So you can now clearly make out what will be our independent, or what should we take in x-axis, that is the dose, and the response will be plotted in y-axis. So we are basically, from a dose response curve, we want to measure or we want to plot how the dose or the amount of dose can vary or can differ in response. So we have basically two types of dose response curve. One is graded and another is quantal. Before diving deeper into these two types of graph, I should also consider that each of the graded or quantal dose response curve can be plotted in two ways. One is arithmetic, and another is logarithmic form. Basically in arithmetic form, the dose response curve is very much similar to this graph, or actually this is a very simpler version where only one function where we use only one function, that is the dose and response. In arithmetic presentation of a curve, the dose response curve will be like this one, the hyperbola. Why hyperbola? You know that there is a term called ceiling effect. What is ceiling effect? before it is very much common sense that when you increase the dose, you will get an increased response. But how long, that is the question. At one time there will be seen in such a way that although you are increasing the dose, the response is becoming very much flat, that is the response is not being changed. Why? Because most of the drugs actually works by binding with receptors. When all the receptors are getting saturated, then the extra dose you are administering will never come to an use or will never produce a response. That means you will get a hyperbolic curve when you plot in an arithmetic way. Now the same arithmetic curve or the same response can be presented in another mechanism, another way, that is the logarithmic form. What is the utility of logarithmic form? Basically the logarithmic form is just a conjugate function. You know what is a conjugate function? I know you know. That do you remember we plotted some graph like this, y equal to f of x, where f of x, the x was another function of y equal to, I say, z. Then you can plot the y in this way, y equal to function of z. So this is actually the logarithmic curve is actually this. When you make the arithmetic curve, just put a logarithm in front of it. So I say that your arithmetic curve is like this. Response is equal to function of dose. Now in logarithmic curve is like this, where you can get that the y-axis, what I can say, the ordinate, that is the y-axis, the ordinate you get will be, I say this is y equal to function, or sorry, I can write the function, that is ln of response. And you know what is response? Response is function of dose. That means when you plot the dose in x-axis and you take the logarithm of the function of the response, and then plot it in y-axis, then there will be your logarithmic expression of drug response curve. So in logarithmic expression, the same drug response curve will be looking like a sigmoid shaped curve. Now the question may arise that if we can plot in a simpler way, in a simplest way, in a single function way, then what is the utility of using this logarithmic function? As simple, I say you got y equal to 3x. Now when you plot 10 for x, it can be plotted in this graph. And also 3x equal to 30, I say whatever, let's say here is 30, you can find like here, this is 10. But when you plot x equal to 100, then you will get 300. But this 300 cannot be easily plotted in y-axis. So when you take the logarithm of 300, say log 10 base, or you can take e base, whatever it is, log 10 base 300, then the amount, the ordinate will be reduced, but the functional utility or the demand or the real relationship between the dose and the response will not be hampered, but can be easily graphically demonstrated. Suppose here is 10, then you can say log 300 of 10, what will be the answer, like in this way. That means that although 300 couldn't be included in the y-axis of arithmetic curve, but ln of 300 can be easily included in this y-axis. So actually the main utility of using this logarithmic function is that we can plot a huge number of data in a small curve. So now let's dive deeper into our main topic. What is graded drag response curve and what is quantile drag response curve? Graded and quantile. I would like to teach you in a differentiating manner. So that you can easily understand this. At first, you should know what is the main theme of using a graded response curve. The graded response curve actually demonstrates the efficacy of a drug. What do I mean by efficacy? Let's suppose that you have taken 500 milligram of, suppose you are having a fever of about 104 degrees Celsius. Now you know the baseline temperature is about 98 point something, but for easier to calculate I am considering 98 degrees Celsius. So what is the difference I should expect from this graph? I would like to expect that this 500 milligram of paracetamol will decrease my temperature for 6 degrees Celsius. But does it really happens, or does it happen all time? No, not so. So when you increase the dose, say whenever you take 250 milligram of paracetamol, it may decrease the temperature for about 2 degrees Celsius. Whenever you take 500 milligram, it may decrease your temperature for 3 degrees Celsius. Whenever you take 1000 milligram or 1 gram, then it may decrease 4 degrees Celsius. So the effect is decrease in temperature. So let's say I am going to plot this effect versus drug response. Here is our dose in milligram and here is our effect, that is reduction of temperature, del T. So when you say for 2 degrees Celsius, 3 degrees Celsius, dose na 250, this is 250 milligram dose, this is 500, this is 750, this is 10, this is 1000 or 1 gram. So for 200 you get of about 2 degrees Celsius, then 300 for 500, at 500 you get 3 degrees Celsius, at 750 you get about 3.5, and then at 1000 you get about 1, and whatever you may take 1500 milligram, then you will see that at one time for a greatly increased dose there will be almost 6 degrees Celsius reduction of your temperature. So when you plot this curve, then you will get this type of curve, and this is actually the graded drag response curve. So why we use the term graded? The term graded actually means continuous. As you see that we are continuously increasing the dose and we are continuously getting more and more response. So this is the utility of a graded drag response curve. So we get the efficacy of a drug according to its dose from graded drag response curve. So you can, as I have mentioned earlier, this arithmetic curve can be plotted, or this arithmetic curve can be demonstrated in another way, that is logarithmic way. So in logarithmic presentation you will get a response curve like this one. So we have found that the efficacy of a drug can be determined from graded drug response curve. Again, the fact we should consider in mind that in graded drug response curve, we are taking the data for an individual. So whenever I said that temperature of your body temperature, only your body temperature is to be mentioned or is to be examined in our experiment in a drug response curve. But whenever you take a statistical analysis for about I say 10,000 people, then you cannot use this graded drug response curve. Again, then for a mass people, we consider the quantal drug response curve. So I say that for a mass people, I take quantal drug response curve. Another fact is that the temperature we are decreasing by administering a drug can be measured by the experiment, by the researcher. But whenever I say that the paracetamol has another effect, that is, it may act as an analgesic. Can you classify, or can you grade, or can you evaluate how much analgesia this same 500 milligram of paracetamol doing? Can you measure the analgesia, the amount of analgesia? No, you cannot measure the amount of analgesia, because this sensation is just patient dependent. So what can I do to get a reasonable value or reasonable data to justify this kind of absence, this kind of awkward response, or what I can say cannot be measured by the researchers? So in this case, we use the quantal drug response curve. How? The question is how. Now I am going to describe why and how we use the quantal drug response curve. Suppose you are taking analgesics. For you have administered this same amount of drug in about thousands of people, in about 10,000 people. I say 10,000 people. But we will now describe the response as yes/no method, yes or no. That is, for each and individual, we will follow all or none law. Actually, the term quantal is derived from the term that either or, yes or no. Now let's say we have 10,000 people, and we have described that we are going to give 500 milligram of paracetamol. Now I will ask individually all of them whether their pain has diminished or not. Say Mr. X says yes, his pain has diminished, but Mr. Y said no, my pain has not relieved. So in such questionnaire, you can measure how many people are responding to this. Suppose I say that for a 500 milligram dose, only 1000 people says that their pain has been relieved. So only 10% people has said that for this dose their drug is working. Now when you increase the dose from 500 to 700 milligram or 750 milligram, then there might be the probability that about 3000 people says that wow, my pain has been relieved. About 3000 people says my pain has relieved. For about 1000 milligram of paracetamol, now say that 500 people has said, oh, my pain has relieved. So we see that when we plot the percentage of population who responses to the amount of drug, and now we are going to plot this idea. Say for about 250 milligram dose. For 250 milligram dose, about 10% people, just an imaginary 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 এরকম, just imaginary. For about 250 milligram, about 10% says yes. Then for about 500 milligram, about 30% says yes. For 750, I am breaking this curve and making it 100. This is 100. For about 750, making there 40% says yes. For about 100,000 milligram, for about 60% says yes. And an increased amount of drug, and you see there will be again same hyperbolic type of curve. Same hyperbolic type of curve will be found. But now we are considering the percentage of people, or the fraction of population that have showed the specific response for a progressively increasing dose. So that is our quantal drug response curve. So again you can plot this drug in logarithmic way. Then again in logarithmic way you will find about a same curve like this one. So now we have already found two differences. For mass people, it acts on all or none law. For individual, but remember, for individual, each and every individual we are measuring or assessing, we will assess all or none law. But this graded drug response curve doesn't follow all or none law. We have seen that in graded drug response curve we have seen a gradual increase or decrease in the response to a drug with response to increase or decrease in the dose of drug. Now, as we have grossly considered what is graded drug response curve and what is quantal drug response curve, now we must dive deeper into the topic. We will now understand what is the utility, or what kind of informations can we get from graded drug response curve and quantal drug response curve. So let's start with graded drug response curve. Now, the basic idea is using this kind of graph is actually very much helpful in drug development. We know that during drug development, thousands of trials are made on individuals or in animals, or increasing or decreasing the dose, making how much toxic dose, or making out how much the median effective dose, and making out this kind of pharmacological data, that is the lethal dose, the toxic dose, the effective dose, the therapeutic index is very much important during drug development. And these data can be made out from our dose response curves. So basically we also consider different types of drugs. Suppose I have got two drugs, drug A and drug B. Now I want to check which drug is more effective. So what I want to say, that which drug is more effective, which drug is more potent, which drug is more effective, which drug is more potent, which drug is more selective. Then also which one is more safe, that is safety. What I mean that which one is less toxic. So we also basically we want to describe these terms comparing these two types of drugs. Again we can use the antagonistic or agonistic criteria. That means we are the drug A can be an agonist, or a drug A can be antagonist. Also B can be the same. So which one is more potent as an agonist or as an antagonist or which one we can apply as a partial agonist. This is our duty as a pharmacologist to assess or to compare different drugs. One, it may be the new drug you are developing, or it may be an already existing drug. So this is the concept of utility of dose response curve. Now let's see what informations can be get from graded drug response curve. One is efficacy. I want to make this discussion in a comparative manner. Suppose I have got two drugs, drug A and B. So I say that drug A shows a graded drug response curve about like this one, and drug B shows graded drug response curve like this one. So which one is more efficacy? Which one has more efficacy? That means which one is more responsive? You may realize that this drug is more efficient, is more responsive for the patient. So this blue drug having more efficacy, because efficacy is plotted in this axis and this is dose. So the fact we got is efficacy. Then affinity. What is affinity? You know that affinity is actually the tendency of a drug to bind with its receptor. Tendency to bind with receptor is affinity. So basically affinity cannot be measured directly. Affinity is measured in terms of potency. So what is potency? Potency is actually the amount of drug. Potency is measured according to the amount of drug which is necessary to get an effect, a desired effect. So whenever I say that there are two drugs, again A and B, say A and B both are analgesics, but A drug can cause analgesia at only 250 milligram, but B drug causes analgesia at 500 milligram. So which one is more potent? What do you think? Obviously this A will be more potent because it can cause the same desired effect in a lower concentration. So potency is measured according to the concentration at which a drug shows its maximum affinity or an effect of a given magnitude. Now what is the utility of dose response curves in measuring potency? So the same example can be plotted in dose response curve. Say I am taking the curve. For A, you will see that this time is dose and this one is response. You may answer that I want to get 50% of the response. You may consider 50% of the response, that I may get 50% of the response at which concentration. For A, I got 50% of the response at 250 milligram. So for A drug, the response curve will be like this. But for drug B, I got the same response at 500 milligram. I got the same 50% response at 500 milligram. So for the drug B, the dose response curve might be like this one. So the same 50% response you are getting for a lower concentration for A, but at higher concentration for B. So at dose response curve, you can determine which one is on the left side. The most left The one at the most left corner will be the most potent one, and the one at the most right corner will be the least potent one. Now, a confusing terms can be arised that which curve should I use? Should I use a graded drag response curve, or should I use a quantile drag response curve to measure the efficacy or the potency of a drug? The answer is that you can use both of these curves. Quite interesting, right? Yes, I am now going to explain this. When you use the graded drug response curve, actually I have used here the graded drug response curve. Why? The graded drug response curve actually shown you the efficacy, the response. So the maximum response was that, and this 100%, and you are considering 50% of maximum response as your given magnitude. So this curve is actually basically from graded drug response curve. Now why the quantile drug response curve? Suppose we are in graded drug response curve, this was examined only on you. But now you are not the only consumer of that drug, right? There are thousands of consumers of that drug. So what can I do for thousands of consumers of the drug? The answer is simple, as I have mentioned earlier, that is quantile drug response curve. Suppose I have got, let me draw another curve. So this one was for drug A, and this one is for drug B. Now on graded drug response curve we used the term response or the efficacy, but now in quantile drug response curve we will consider the percentage of population who have shown the response. Suppose at you say you want to consider 50% of population. Suppose you have given the drug for about 10,000 people. Now you want to see that at which curve or at which concentration 50%, that means 5,000 of the people will show the response. 50% of the people will show the response. So you can clearly distinguish that for drug A less amount of dose is required, but for drug B more and more drug is required, so that for making the same effect for 50% of people, drug A is more potent because it requires less concentration of drug to make the same effect on 50% people. You can use on 20% as your taken data. You could use 80% on your taken data or taken for granted. You could use 100% also, but why we are using 50%? That is the question. Basically this can be called as a convention. Basically a term is derived from this quantile drug response curve, that is ED50. ED50 is a term or a pharmacological index that is got from basically quantile drug response curve at which 50% of the observed population shows the same effect or potency of the drug. So two terms have been described against the graded drug response curve. And now another term can be get from the graded drug response curve is the selectivity of a drug. Now what is selectivity of a drug and what is specificity of a drug? There are two terms. One is specificity and another is selectivity. Specificity actually means the exact response what you want. exact response what you want. That is, there are many drugs, and many drugs are causing many thousands of various activities. Now you want to get an exact, a single response from a drug, that is specificity. Now the idea can be like this, that from paracetamol you can get both analgesic, antipyretic effect, but you want to consider only antipyrexia or only analgesics, antipyrexia or only analgesic. That means you have now selected only one criteria or only one action of the drug, that is called specificity. But the harsh reality is that specificity cannot be measured, and specificity actually does not lie. What is the fact is that you know that a drug acts by receptors. Basically, a classical drugs basically works through binding with receptors. So how many receptors are there present in your cell membrane or inside the cell or inside the nucleus? Can you imagine? Basically numerous. You can what you can measure, it will outnumber always. So the fact is that when you administer a drug, suppose this receptor binding with this receptor will cause analgesia, and binding with this receptor will cause antipyrexia. Now you cannot command the drug that, hey Mr. Paracetamol, you go and bind only with this one, or hey Mr. Paracetamol, you go and bind only with this one. No, this is merely impossible in a physiological condition. So basically what we use to describe how much the drug I want to effect on a single function, that can be that can be determined in selectivity. That means now I can say that paracetamol is selective for these two receptors only. That means paracetamol is not binding with this one, not this one, not this one. Paracetamol is selective for only antipyrexic and anti-analgesic function. So that's why the terms selectivity comes from. Now what is the utility of making the dose response curve in selectivity? That is very simple. You will say that for specific analgesia, you will always use aspirin instead of paracetamol. Why? Because although paracetamol can produce analgesia, but selectively or specifically when I want the action on analgesia, aspirin will be more potent than paracetamol in this selective or in this specific criteria. There are many a lot of examples in your books. There are many comparisons. Again, for aspirin, you can say that aspirin causes analgesia, aspirin has some antiplatelet functions. So for specific antiplatelet action, will you want to give aspirin or any other more potent drug only for or specific for antiplatelet activity? Then this kind of comparison between two drugs can be done only by comparing their dose response curves. That means you are making a selective response here, comparing selective response of two or more drugs in this way. Another fact we can get from the graded drug response curve is the safety margin of the drug, or the, as I have seen, that maximum effect what can be graded from what can be get from the dose response curve. So the safety margin could be plotted in this way, that for a toxic response, how much drug will be required to cause a toxic response. Say this one is my effective response curve, and obviously as a drug this one can be my toxic drug response curve, then you can see that for up to this margin, the drug is safe. The drug is safe for you. But above this margin, there might be a question whether the drug is safe or the drug is toxic. Basically, this type of safety margin can be more detailed or more elaborated way expressed in quantal drug response curve. In quantal response curve, we get more valid data on the safety margin, because I have already said that you are not the only one who are consuming the drug. So when you are prescribing a drug, you should consider a large number of people, a mass population, what a drug can cause to a mass population. Now the same things can be also called that, you know, that there are individual variations in response curve. There are individual variations. You know what individual variations can be from genetic cause, from different from inflammatory cause, or from any other cause, or any kind of sufferings or any kind of disease you are suffering, like hepatic disorders, etc., etc. So you can measure on individual recipient whether how much the drug is actually affecting that individual, or by using a graded drug response curve. Another fact you can consider, that is the types of antagonism. Basically, antagonism is a large topic. So antagonism can be also the which one is more potent antagonist, or which one is more effective antagonist, which one is more safe or more selective. These types of antagonistic studies can be also done in from graded drug response curve. So as it is a very large topic, we will describe in another video, inshallah. So now we should take a deep dive on quantal drug response curve, what kind of data we can get from a quantal drug response curve. So basically, from quantal drug response curve, we also can get potency. I have already mentioned in graded drug response curve how the quantal drug response curve can also give the potency or the efficacy, the potency actually only. This is the graph I have described here, how the quantal drug response curve can also give an idea about the potency of a drug. Now from quantal drug response curve, we can get some various clues. One is median effective dose. This one is the median effective dose. I have already described that for a large population, while prescribing drugs, by convention you must study the median effective dose, how much dose will cause an effect of about 50% people. So from quantal drug response curve, you can get that median effective dose. Similarly, you can get the median toxic dose or median lethal dose. So median toxic dose, median lethal dose, etc. So toxic dose, actually the same one, median toxic dose actually gets, you say toxicity is not the one that is lethality. Lethality is just dying or killing effect of a drug, and toxicity can be other facts from except killing. Toxicity also includes killing too, but toxicity is a wide range or wide variable. Now I am considering a large graph. Let me draw this. So suppose you are getting this one is dose. When you increase the dose, it's a very much common sense that as you increase the dose, the toxicity will be in more and more people. So this will also give you a sigmoid shaped curve. This is for toxicity. This is 100%, and you want to see at which dose about 50% of people is showing toxicity. So these dose, say this is X milligram, this X milligram dose is will be called median toxic dose, at which about 50% of the recipient will get a toxic effect from the drug. Now, another fact can be also the same one can be plotted for the lethality. Say this one is for the lethality. I should draw it more sincerely. Sorry for that. This one is for lethality. So this again 50%. Now you take the abscissa. Say y milligram is that. This y milligram at which this y milligram drug at which 50% of the population will die. This is called lethal dose, median lethal dose. Now the question is that will you apply the lethal dose for an individual? No, never. It's inhuman to kill a patient. So what we basically do to get the lethal dose is that we use an animal. Basically the lethal dose or median lethal dose that we get is just from the data that we get from experimenting on an animal. So this was another terms. Now I should give you a hint that the therapeutic index and window can also be got from this quantile drug response curve. What is actually the therapeutic index? Therapeutic index is the ratio of median toxic dose and median effective dose. Median toxic dose and median effective dose. That means, say, this one is our curve. Let me draw a curve. This one is for efficacy. Say this graph is for efficacy, and this curve is for toxicity. So again, you know that median effective dose can be get from considering 50% of the people. So this is 50%. So now this part, this portion, this amount of drug, say, let's say, I should use another color. This portion, say x milligram of drug. This x milligram of drug is the median effective dose. This is for efficacy and this is for toxicity. And y milligram drug, let's say this y milligram drug will cause toxicity in 50% people. So y milligram drug is basically the median toxic dose. So the ratio of y by x. So the ratio of y by x will be your therapeutic index. Now, what is the utility of therapeutic index? You see that when you increase y, that means a larger amount of dose. So at last we see therapeutic index. So when you see that a drug having more therapeutic index, it indicates that the y, that means the median toxic dose is higher. That means a large amount of dose is required to produce toxicity. So you can safely increase the dose of that drug. On the other hand, a drug having therapeutic index very low, that means that the x is low, x is higher. That means median effective dose is higher and median toxic dose is lower. That means these two curves will come closer. A. In such case, you will see that there is only very little difference between effective dose and toxic dose. That means when you increase the dose for a little, it will cause toxicity. So the drugs having less therapeutic index are always less prescribed and should be prescribed in a concerned way. So that was the indications of therapeutic index. Now, an interesting fact I should share with you about therapeutic index, that a drug can have different therapeutic index. A same drug can have different therapeutic index according to its clinical use. For example, I can take aspirin. You know, aspirin is taken for analgesia. Aspirin is taken for anti-inflammatory. Aspirin is taken as antiplatelet. So, for different clinical use, the therapeutic index can be different. How? The fact is that the median toxic dose for aspirin is almost normal, almost constant. Okay, let me draw a precise. The median toxic dose will be constant for aspirin. Suppose this one is Y, this is the median toxic dose. But for analgesia, you will see that for analgesia only small amount of dose is required. That means for analgesic purpose, ED50 is less, but for anti-inflammatory function, ED50 is more. So let's say for analgesic function, this is our dose response curve, but for anti-inflammatory purpose, this is our dose response curve. This is analgesic, this is anti-inflammatory, and this one is toxic. So for making analgesia, only small amount of drug is required. So ED50 is less. So ED50 is less for analgesia. So the ratio of TD50 and ED50 will be higher. That means the therapeutic index will be higher. But for anti-inflammatory function, the effective dose at which the anti-inflammatory function will be produced is higher. Effective dose is higher. You know the ratio of toxic dose 50 divided by effective dose 50. So for anti-inflammatory function, this effective dose is higher, so the fraction will be low and the therapeutic index will be low. So that was a cool stuff on therapeutic index. Now, what is the window? Actually, window is the difference between minimum effective dose and minimum toxic dose. So let's say, let me draw another curve. So this is our effective dose curve and this is our toxic dose curve. Now you see that there is a difference between the minimum effective drug dose and minimum toxic dose. Minimum effective dose is that amount of dose which is must required to produce a therapeutic effect, and minimum toxic dose is the minimum most smallest amount of dose at which the toxicity begins. This difference between minimum toxic dose and minimum therapeutic dose is termed as therapeutic window. Now I have a question for you. Which one is more safer in which one is safer in prescribing a drug, to depend on therapeutic index or to depend on therapeutic window? So I have question, which one is more effective? So you can see that therapeutic window is more safer, because in therapeutic window we consider almost no toxic effect on individual, on a single individual, not even a single individual will face toxicity if the dose is less than the minimum toxic dose, or the dose is within therapeutic window. But you have seen that while measuring therapeutic index, we have measured the median toxic dose. That means 50% of the population. So when you prescribe a drug at this amount, there are some unlucky people, say 20%. There are some unlucky 20% people or 30% people. These people will not be considered while taking the ratio as therapeutic index. So we prefer therapeutic window as a more safer tool than therapeutic index. So that's all for today, friends. This was my first video. So I know there are some mistakes I have made, especially in my pronunciations and efficiency. So please forgive me. Thank you. Hopefully I'm going to meet you another day. Assalamu alaikum.